What happens when a seasoned journalist refuses to follow the rules of royal protocol? You won't believe what happens when Meghan Markle sits down with George Stephanopoulos on Good Morning America, expecting easy questions and sympathetic nods, only to face a relentless interrogation about her post-royal life. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone sideways. It's a masterclass in journalistic integrity, confronting manufactured victims, and the explosive exchange that unfolded live on national television will leave you stunned. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave a comment, because what happened when these two powerhouses clashed during 7 tense minutes of morning TV is unforgettable. The tension was immediate as Meghan Markle stepped onto the GMA set, dressed in her signature beige ensemble, calculated choice to convey both sophistication and approachability. She settled into the interview chair with the practiced ease of someone experienced in public appearances. Her smile was camera-ready, her posture deliberately relaxed, and her hands positioned to subtly display the expensive jewelry that had become part of her carefully curated image. Across from her, George Stephanopoulos, a veteran of countless political interviews, sat with his trademark intensity barely concealed behind a professional exterior. Unlike the fawning interviewers Meghan had grown used to since leaving royal duties, Stephanopoulos came prepared, armed with questions that cut straight to the controversies shadowing her. The opening pleasantries were textbook television warm greetings, compliments on her appearance, the usual setup before the real conversation begins. But even then, something felt off. Stephanopoulos' smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and Meghan's responses carried an undertone of weariness, hinting that this wouldn't be the promotional platform she expected. "Thank you for joining us this morning, Meghan," Stephanopoulos began, his voice carrying the calm-before-the-storm cadence seasoned viewers recognize. "You've been quite active lately with your projects and public statements. Our viewers are curious about the disconnect between your calls for privacy and your continued presence in the media spotlight." The question landed with surgical precision, immediately putting Meghan on the defensive. Her practiced smile faltered just for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable to casual viewers, but clear to anyone familiar with subtle cues of someone caught off guard. "Well, George, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about what privacy means in this context," she replied, her voice adopting the measured tone she had perfected for difficult conversations. "When we speak about privacy, we're talking about the right to control our own narrative, especially when it comes to protecting our children and our family's well-being." Stephanopoulos leaned forward slightly, signaling he wasn't satisfied with the deflection. "But isn't there a contradiction in seeking privacy while engaging in high-profile interviews, documentaries, and public appearances? You've given numerous interviews since stepping back from royal duties, each discussing very personal family matters." The studio atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Meghan's media training kicked in as she tried to regain control of the narrative. But Stephanopoulos wasn't following the usual rules of celebrity interviews. This wasn't Entertainment Tonight or a friendly chat show. This was serious journalism, and he treated her like any public figure facing scrutiny. "I think people need to understand that. When you're constantly misrepresented in the media, when lies are told about you and your family, you have a responsibility to set the record straight." Meghan responded, her voice gaining an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "We didn't choose to engage with the media. We were forced to because of continuous attacks and mischaracterizations." The word "forced" lingered, and Stephanopoulos pounced like a seasoned interviewer accustomed to politicians bending the truth. "Forced is an interesting word choice," he said, professional yet noticeably sharper, "because from the outside, it appears that you and Harry have been quite strategic about your media engagements. The timing of your Oprah interview, for example, came just as your father-in-law was facing health issues and your grandmother-in-law was in her final months. Some might argue that the timing was designed to maximize impact while limiting the family's ability to respond." This was the moment the interview shifted from uncomfortable to truly confrontational. Meghan's carefully maintained composure began to crack, revealing the person behind the polished public image. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and her hands, previously resting casually in her lap, gripped the arms of her chair. "I find it really disappointing that you would characterize our truthtelling as calculated," she replied, her voice rising slightly. "We waited years to tell our side of the story. We endured constant attacks, racist coverage, and deliberate attempts to undermine our work and our relationship. The idea that we should have remained silent while our reputations were being destroyed is frankly absurd." Stephanopoulos didn't back down. If anything, her defensive response seemed to energize him, as though he had found exactly the pressure point he was seeking. "But let's talk about some of these claims," he continued, pulling out a tablet clearly filled with detailed notes. "You've made several allegations over the years that have been disputed by other sources. The Archbishop of Canterbury, for example, contradicted your claim about a secret wedding ceremony. Palace sources have disputed other claims. How do you respond to critics who say you've been selective with the truth?" The question hit like a thunderbolt. Meghan's face flushed, and for a moment, she seemed genuinely speechless. This was clearly not the direction she expected, and her discomfort became increasingly visible to everyone in the studio. "I'm sorry. Are you calling me a liar?" she asked, her voice carrying unmistakable indignation. "Because if that's what you're suggesting, I think we need to be very clear about what's happening here." The studio fell silent, except for the barely audible hum of cameras. Even the crew seemed to sense that something significant was unfolding. Stephanopoulos maintained his professional demeanor, but there was a steel in his eyes, signaling he was prepared to take this confrontation as far as necessary. "I'm not calling you anything," he replied calmly. "I'm asking you to address the discrepancies between your public statements and documented facts. That's journalism asking difficult questions and seeking clarification when stories don't align with established evidence." This response seemed to infuriate Meghan further. She shifted in her chair, her body language becoming increasingly defensive as she prepared to launch what would become a blistering counterattack, altering the trajectory of the interview. But as she opened her mouth, Stephanopoulos' expression suggested even more explosive questions were coming. The real confrontation had only just begun. The air in the studio crackled with tension as Meghan straightened in her chair. Her carefully maintained composure was slipping completely. What began as subtle discomfort had now transformed into something far more volatile, and everyone present sensed they were witnessing a moment destined to be replayed and analyzed for years. "You know what, George?" Meghan began, her voice equal parts condescending and defensive. "I think what's really happening here is that you're perpetuating the same narrative British tabloids have pushed for years. You're taking their word over mine, and frankly, I expected better from someone of your stature." Stephanopoulos remained unmoved. He had faced presidents, prime ministers, and some of the world's most powerful figures. A deflection from a former cable television actress wasn't going to derail his pursuit of the truth. "I'm not taking anyone's word," he replied evenly. "I'm presenting you with documented evidence and asking for your response. That's how journalism works. For instance, you claimed in your Oprah interview that you surrendered your passport and driver's license upon joining the royal family and weren't allowed to leave the country. Yet we have photographic evidence of you traveling to New York for your baby shower, to Canada multiple times, and on various other international trips during your time as a working royal. How do you reconcile these contradictory statements?" The question landed with devastating accuracy. Meghan's eyes widened, and for a moment she appeared genuinely caught off guard. This was not the softball interview she had expected, and Stephanopoulos' meticulous preparation was becoming increasingly evident with each passing minute. That's completely taken out of context," she stammered, her usual eloquence faltering under the weight of specific documented evidence. "What I meant was that there were restrictions, protocols that had to be followed. Every trip required approval, coordination with security teams, and adherence to strict guidelines that essentially made it impossible to have any genuine freedom of movement." Stephanopoulos consulted his tablet again, a gesture that visibly increased Meghan's discomfort. She could see he had done extensive research, and her growing anxiety became more apparent with each passing second. "But that contradicts what other members of the royal family have said about their experiences," he pressed. "Prince William and Catherine have spoken about their international travels, and their accounts suggest a very different level of autonomy than what you've described. Are you suggesting you were treated differently than other family members?" The question struck at the heart of one of Meghan's most serious allegations. Her response revealed her frustration at being held accountable. "Of course I was treated differently," she snapped, her voice rising as her carefully maintained public persona continued to crumble. "Do you really think the first biracial American woman to marry into the British royal family would be treated the same as everyone else? The racism, the double standards, the deliberate attempts to undermine everything I tried to do was relentless and systematic." Stephanopoulos leaned back slightly, his expression suggesting he had anticipated this response and was ready for the next step. "Let's talk about those racism allegations specifically," he said, his tone even more serious. "You made very serious accusations regarding concerns about your son's skin color. Yet when pressed for details, you've been vague about who made these comments and in what context. Don't you think the public deserves more specificity when such serious accusations are being made?" The question visibly rattled Meghan, who shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her media training had prepared her for many scenarios, but facing a journalist unwilling to accept vague deflections and demanding concrete evidence was clearly not one of them. "I protected the people involved by not naming them," she replied, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "But the conversations happened, and they were deeply hurtful and concerning to both Harry and myself." Stephanopoulos pressed forward, relentless. "But without specifics, without context, without named sources, how can the public evaluate these claims? Journalism requires verification, corroboration, evidence. You're asking people to take your word on extremely serious allegations without providing any means of verification." The challenge seemed to push Meghan past a critical threshold. Her face flushed with anger, and her voice trembled as she struggled to maintain control. Are you seriously questioning whether I experienced racism? She asked incredulously. Are you suggesting I imagined the countless articles comparing me to my sister? The difference in coverage between us, the way every single thing I did was scrutinized and criticized, while similar actions by other family members were praised. Stephanopoulos remained calm, his professional demeanor contrasting sharply with her increasingly emotional responses. I am not questioning your experiences, he replied evenly. I'm questioning the specific claims you've made about specific incidents. There's a difference between experiencing unfair media coverage and alleging that members of the royal family made racist comments about your unborn child. Those are very different levels of accusation. The distinction seemed to infuriate Meghan further. Her response revealed just how unprepared she was for this level of scrutiny. This is exactly what I'm talking about, she exclaimed, her voice now clearly audible to everyone in the studio. You're splitting hairs, minimizing my experiences, and essentially calling me a liar while hiding behind the pretense of journalistic integrity. This isn't journalism. This is harassment disguised as an interview. The accusation struck a nerve with Stephanopoulos. His expression hardened perceptibly. He had spent decades building a reputation for fair but tough journalism, and having his professional integrity questioned by someone who had consistently avoided substantive scrutiny was unacceptable. I'm asking the questions that need to be asked, he replied, his voice taking on a steely edge. Questions that no one else seems willing to ask. If accountability makes you uncomfortable, that says more about your previous interview experiences than it does about my journalistic approach. The response appeared to be the final straw for Meghan, who now struggled visibly to maintain composure. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles had turned white, and her breathing grew shallow and rapid. Accountability, she repeated, her voice rising toward a shout. This isn't accountability. This is a deliberate attempt to discredit me and invalidate my experiences. You've made up your mind before I even walked in, and now you're trying to tear me down, piece by piece. The studio fell silent except for the faint hum of cameras, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming one of the most explosive celebrity interviews in recent memory. Production assistants exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation continue. Sensing that, Meghan was on the verge of either a breakdown or a dramatic exit, Stephanopoulos pushed one step further with a question that would prove to be the point of no return. Meghan, he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of investigative journalism. Let me ask you about something our research team uncovered while preparing for this interview. We found financial records showing that you and Harry received substantial payments from Netflix and Spotify before officially stepping down from royal duties. How do you reconcile your claims about being cut off financially by the royal family with evidence that you were already securing lucrative entertainment deals while still working royals? The question hit like a bomb in the studio. Meghan's face cycled through shock, panic, fury, and finally a cold rage that seemed to consume everything. Her carefully constructed public persona didn't just crack, it shattered, exposing something raw and desperate beneath. How dare you, she whispered, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. How dare you sit there and act like you understand what we went through? You have no idea what it's like to be abandoned by an institution, to have your security stripped away, to fend for yourself while tabloids tear you apart daily. Stephanopoulos remained unmoved, consulting his notes with the calm professionalism of someone who had weathered countless political storms. But the timeline doesn't support that narrative, he continued relentlessly. According to these documents, initial discussions with streaming platforms began months before your official departure from royal duties. This suggests a level of planning and preparation that contradicts your claims about being suddenly cut off and left with no options. Meghan shot to her feet so abruptly, her chair rolled backward several feet, the sound echoing through the silent studio, her face flushed with rage, her hands trembling as she struggled to process that her carefully constructed narrative was being dismantled on live television. This is unbelievable, she said, her voice sharp, almost hysterical. You've ambushed me with selectively edited information taken out of context. And now you're trying to paint me as some calculating opportunist. This isn't journalism. This is character assassination. Stephanopoulos looked up from his notes, a mix of professional satisfaction and concern on his face. These aren't edited documents, Meghan. These are public financial filings and contractual agreements. I'm simply asking you to explain the discrepancies between your public statements and documented evidence. The challenge seemed to push Meghan past any remaining control. She began pacing behind her chair like a caged animal, her movements erratic and agitated, struggling to formulate a response that could salvage the situation. You want to know the truth? She practically shouted, her voice echoing through the studio. The truth is that we had to protect ourselves because nobody else would. We had to secure our future because the institution made it clear we were expendable. Yes, we explored our options. Wouldn't you, if your family was being systematically destroyed by lies and racism? Stephanopoulos seized on this admission with the instincts of a seasoned investigator, who had just heard a crucial piece of evidence. So, you acknowledged that you were actively pursuing commercial opportunities while still claiming to be committed to royal duties. He pressed, his tone growing increasingly pointed. And you did this while publicly stating you wanted to continue serving the Queen and the Commonwealth. The question struck at the heart of what many critics had long suspected, that Meghan's departure from royal life had been far more calculated and self-serving than her public statements suggested. Her response revealed just how unprepared she was for this level of scrutiny. "You're twisting my words," she screamed, her composure completely abandoned. "You're taking everything I say and turning it into something sinister. This is exactly why we had to leave, because people like you were determined to destroy us no matter what we did." The studio fell silent, save for Meghan's increasingly frantic voice and the faint hum of cameras capturing every moment. Production assistants stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. Recognizing he had pushed her to the breaking point, Stephanopoulos delivered what would prove the final blow. "Meghan," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of investigative journalism, "you've built your entire post-royal brand on being a victim of institutional racism and family betrayal. Yet the evidence suggests a pattern of strategic decision-making, careful planning, and deliberate narrative construction that contradicts almost everything you've said publicly. How do you expect the American public to trust anything you say when the facts tell a different story?" The question hung in the air like a verdict. Meghan stopped pacing and faced Stephanopoulos directly, her face a mask of pure rage and wounded pride. For a moment, it seemed she might launch another defensive tirade, but instead, something inside her broke. "I'm done," she said quietly, her voice flat and emotionless. "I'm absolutely done with this charade." She moved toward her chair as if to sit, but grabbed her purse so violently that several items spilled onto the floor. Her movements were sharp and erratic as she struggled with the microphone clipped to her jacket, her hands shaking too much to remove it properly. "This entire interview has been a setup from the beginning," she declared, her voice rising again as she freed herself from the microphone and let it fall with a sharp clatter. "You had no intention of having an honest conversation. You just wanted to humiliate me on live television." Stephanopoulos remained seated, observing her meltdown with the detached professionalism of someone who had seen similar scenes countless times. "I wanted honest answers to legitimate questions," he replied calmly. "If you find that humiliating, that's not a reflection of my intentions. It's a reflection of the contradictions in your own statements." This final response seemed more than Meghan could bear. She straightened to her full height, fixed him with a look of pure hatred, and delivered what would become the most quoted line from the entire interview. "You know what, George? You can take your legitimate questions and your documented evidence and shove them where the sun doesn't shine. I don't have to sit here and listen to this garbage from someone who's clearly been bought and paid for by the same people trying to destroy me for years." The accusation appeared to genuinely surprise Steph, who raised his eyebrows slightly but maintained his composure. "That's a very serious accusation, Meghan. Do you have any evidence to support it, or is this another statement you can't substantiate?" The question was the final straw. Meghan let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scream, gathered the remaining contents of her purse, and stormed toward the studio exit with such determination that production assistants had to quickly move out of her way. "Find yourself another victim for your hit job," she called over her shoulder. "I'm done being your entertainment for the morning." As she reached the studio door, she turned back one last time, her face still flushed and her voice carrying across the silent room. "And for the record, everything I said about that family and that institution is true. The fact that you'd rather believe palace bureaucrats and racist tabloids over a woman who lived through it says everything anyone needs to know about who you really are." With that, Meghan Markle pushed through the doors and disappeared, leaving a stunned silence that stretched on. The cameras continued rolling, capturing Stephanopoulos sitting alone at the desk, his expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and genuine amazement. After several long seconds, he turned to the camera and delivered the interview's most memorable moment. "Well," he said with characteristic understatement, "that certainly wasn't the conversation we expected this morning. We'll be right back after these messages." As the show cut to commercial, the studio buzzed with conversation. Crew members knew they had just witnessed television history. The interview meant to rehabilitate Meghan Markle's public image had instead become a masterclass in how quickly a carefully constructed narrative could collapse under real journalism. The confrontation was over, but its impact would reverberate across the media landscape for months, a reminder that even the most polished public figures cannot escape accountability. When faced with a journalist unwilling to play by their rules,